everyone, welcome to my channel. Now a few weeks ago, after I introduced my Keto Brioche buns or rolls, some of you have asked me whether we could turn the buns into loaves, now it's easy to turn loaves into buns, but not the other way around, unfortunately, because the ratio is very different. So what I did was I experimented on making the loaf, and I found two things. Number one is when I put the whole dough into the pan, it rose very nicely, but then it deflated after it was baked, maybe because it's heavy. So to fix that, I divided the dough into 3 portions and made them into balls, 3 big balls, and then I just put all in a loaf in the pan, and it rose beautifully and it did not deflate. So I was very happy with that. Now the other thing that I found was the same amount of butter as in the buns is a bit too much for the loaf because it was very oily. I'm not sure why, maybe because the buns have more crust. So I reduced the butter by half and it turned out very nicely. I want to share with you a few important points before we start making this bread. Now, number one, the most important thing is the size of the loaf pan. When we're making yeast bread, we want a pan that is narrow and tall. So narrow and tall, because you want the dough to rise upwards, not sideways. Okay. Now if you use a bigger pan, there will be too much space and the dough will just expand sideways to fill up all the gaps. Then you will find that your loaf is big but flat. So this is a 8-inch by 3.5-inch width. The length is 8-inch and the height is 3 inches. Okay. Now, and this works beautifully, it fits the dough nicely, and it about halfway, and it rolls way beyond the pan. Now you can also use a this is a standard 8.5 by 4.5 by 2 inches. So it is a bit wide and a bit low, so the dough will rise a little bit, not too much. So you'll find that the difference with this and the pan just now is this one, it will be wider but lower. The other one, it will be taller, it will be more narrower, but it will be taller. So when the dough fits the pan nicely, it has nowhere to rise but upwards. So that is what we want. The pan is very important. Assuming you use this big loaf, this is like 8 by 5.5 by 3 inches. And the dough only fits in the middle, so it will spread sideways. And in the end, I mean, there's so much the dough, the yeast can make the dough rise only. So it will spread sideways because of all the empty spaces. So you'll find that the bread will turn out big but flat. So the size of the pan is so important because every time, I've been stressing that in all my videos with yeast bread, and every time somebody comes back and tell me that why did her yeast bread did not rise, the first question I will ask is, what size pan are you using? And most of the time I found out that it's 9 by 5 or 10 by 5, which is actually too big. So that's why they did not notice that the bread has risen, but it has just gone sideways. Now if you still want to use bigger pans, it's still possible, but you need to increase the recipe. Now this pan, this is a very suitable pan, and it's actually just a cake tins, where most of the bakeries use. It's very cheap, very inexpensive, but it hasn't got that non-stick element. Okay, so you need to put parchment paper. But this is what they use for cakes and also bread. In bakeries for bread, they might have a bigger tin, but these are excellent for yeast bread. Now, the next and most important thing if you want to do keto bread, is you need to get a scale. This is a digital scale. It's very inexpensive. This probably costs about US $10, you know. But keto bread is so complicated, so because of all the ingredients, so we need to be very precise. We need to weigh the ingredients. You might be able to get away with cakes, you know, but bread is very important. We need to make sure that the ingredients are accurate. Now, I want to talk about proofing now. Now, there are two ways to add the yeast. One is you add it into the dry mixture, and the other one is you add it into a very warm water. Now, I would say it's more effective to add it in the very warm water, because that sort of wakes the yeast up. Because the yeast have been dormant for so long, they just need that very warm water to give them a boost to wake up, right? So once they are up, then they will work very effectively. Now, the water should not be lukewarm. It should be something about 122 to 132 Fahrenheit or 50 to 56 Celsius. Now, you may think that is very hot. It's actually not hot, it's just very warm. You can stick your finger into the water. You will find it's quite hot. It doesn't burn, but you find it's a bit hot. But that is the right temperature. It does not kill the yeast. The minute you mix it with the yeast, you stir it, the temperature also goes down a bit. But I've made so many loaves with this temperature and it works very well. It wakes the yeast up very well. Now, sugar is actually not necessary, okay? When you mix the water, the very warm water, and the yeast, stir it, you just wait for a while. If there's a little bit of bubbling, that already shows you that the yeast is alive and it's good to go, okay? Now, if you feel more comfortable to add the sugar, then please go ahead and do so, okay? Now, when the yeast is mixed, the yeast mixture is mixed into the dry ingredients, it will feed on the very little amount of sugar from the flour and the milk, okay? So you don't have to worry that they have nothing to feed on. The other thing that a lot of people are showing concern, they say salt kills the yeast. The truth is, salt does not kill the yeast. If you put them together and you leave them there untouched for a few minutes, yes, the salt will kill the yeast. But if you put them together and you mix them immediately, no damage is done, okay? So it depends on how you, what you do with the salt and the yeast. So typically, you do not have to worry when the salt is mixed with the yeast and you just mix them immediately. It's fine, okay? Now, there are two methods to proof the yeast. One is you leave it at a very warm area in your house, or you put it in the oven to proof. I find that putting it at a warm area is not as effective as in the oven. So with the oven, turn on the heat about 210 or 100 degrees Celsius. It will not kill the yeast, do not worry. I've proved many loaves in this oven at this temperature. Actually, the yeast likes very, very warm temperature. And the boiling water we put below the dough helps to create the humidity. And together with the very warm oven, it gives them a very conducive environment to thrive. So it works very well. I've done this with many, many loaves, okay? Now, if you compare to regular bread, the protein in gluten helps the bread to rise very, very well. So in the same concept, when we are baking a low carb keto bread, yeast bread actually, we try to include more protein. So I have chosen to use egg whites solely because the protein makes the bread rise so well. So it doesn't mean you use yeast, it will rise very well. Because if you make eggless yeast bread, it would not rise very well because of the lack of protein, even though you use yeast. Okay, so in this case we use more egg whites, okay, to help it to rise better. If you're using yolks, whole eggs, all right, the yolks has fats, so the fats will hinder the rise. So that's why I prefer to use egg whites. Okay, now even the other thing that helps is with the milk. So pea milk has high protein, so it helps with the rice as well. So in all my other yeast bread, if you want a better rice, you just replace the water with pea milk, for instance, or almond milk, because they will have higher protein content. Okay, so getting the protein in will help the bread to rise more. Now the same thing will apply if you use protein powder. If you include protein powder into the bread, it will rise even better. But protein powder is expensive, okay, and you have to get the right ratio. I have been experimenting on it for quite a while. I still haven't got the right ratio. When that happens, the texture is like styrofoam, not a very nice texture. So the key is build more protein into the bread so that it helps to rise better. Now the next thing I want to share is an important ingredient. It's called the psyllium husk. It's a natural fiber. It acts as the gluten. It holds everything together. It provides the elasticity to shape the dough. Now without psyllium husk, the bread will be crumbly and it will end up like a cake-like texture. So with psyllium husk, the bread looks more bread-like. Okay, now you can buy the whole husk. I normally use a brand called Country Farm, and I'm from Malaysia. I easily can get it from the supermarket, but Country Farm brand ran out of stock, so I got this, and it's organic psyllium husk. This brand is also good. Now when you buy this, these are in husk, so you just need to grind it. Actually, this is the best for baking. You buy it and then you grind it yourself. So this is the husk that comes in the packaging. It's a bit coarse. Okay, so what you need to do is just to grind it until half its original volume, like this. Yeah, you can use a spice grinder, a seed grinder, coffee bean grinder, or a multi grinder. If you have a powerful blender, you can use that too, or a food processor. Now after grinding, it becomes half, and that's it. You just need to grind it until half its original volume, and it will be finer. It's not powdery, but it's just much finer, and this is enough for it to absorb the water. Okay, now the hot water is basically the boiling water we use is to activate the glue properties of the psyllium husk. Okay, now if you're using pre-grounded powder, psyllium husk powder, frankly I have not used it before. I know it's available, but it's not that easily available. But for baking, actually this one is much better. But in case you're using the powder form, based on feedback that I receive, I find that it is super fine. The texture is super fine, so it is much more concentrated. You need to reduce the quantity. Otherwise the bread is very dense and wet and gummy, you know. So the measurements we give is based on this one, where we grind it ourselves until half the volume. So if you're using powder form, I would say just reduce by 1 tablespoon. If it's still too much, then you might start to reduce another ½ tablespoon and see how it goes. To understand more about psyllium husk and even other ingredients for making keto bread, I would suggest you check out the description box of this video. It's called How to Turn Problematic Keto Bread into the Best Keto Bread. You can see the link on top of the video at the end of this video. it is written in a very detailed format. One of the last thing I want to share is substitution of ingredients. I know every time I come out with a video, you guys will ask, can I substitute with this and that? For keto bread, it is actually not easy to substitute ingredients. I still remember my first yeast bread, I went through like 15 to 20 loaves just to get it right. So and every time I come up with a new yeast bread, I go through many experiments to get it right too, you know. So it is not easy to substitute ingredients without experimenting on it to know whether it works or not, because low carb ingredients are quite complicated and very different. They have different characteristics, they have different ratios, so it has to be tested before we know it works or not. Okay, so I hope you guys understand that. If we can substitute, yes, then I'll let you know. I'm sorry that this session is taking quite long, but I just want to make sure that I share all the information, the important information for you to understand better and have better success at making keto bread in general, not just this bread, but in general. So now that we've got all these things over with, I hope you have a good understanding. Now let's get started by making this softest, fluffiest, flavorful keto brioche loaf.